So before we have Michael come up and give his talk to us, we're going to take a quick reading, and that reading is going to be from 1st of Thessalonians chapter 5 and verses 1 to 11, and I'll read that for you now. 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 to 11. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say, peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that that day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are all the children of light and the children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. Therefore, let us not sleep, as do others, but let us watch and be sober. For they that sleep, sleep in the night, and they that be drunken are drunken in the night. But let us, who are of the day, be sober, putting on the breastplate of faith and love, and for an helmet the hope of salvation. For God hath not appointed us to wrath, but to obtain salvation by the Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, that, whether we wake or sleep, we shall live together with him. Wherefore, comfort yourselves together, and edify one another, even as also ye do. Be at peace. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. Welcome to tonight's World Watch, looking at the current events, as we mentioned, over the past 3 months or thereabouts. You're going to hear a lot of gloom and doom tonight. That's what makes the news, right? So I'm going to try and keep it to the facts, what we can find within the headlines, without too much supposition about where we would go or where things might lead from here. And yeah, hopefully we can just keep to the facts. So we're going to start off with a bit of a microscopic view, zoom into where we live, and hopefully everyone recognises that we're looking at Adelaide. And especially for us here within this ecclesia, this hall, at Golden Grove. So over the 3 months, December, January, February, thereabouts, we have personally had our Sunday school prize night. We've had a break from our ecclesial activities with Sunday school, with Sunday evenings and our Wednesday night classes breaking up. We've had our youth group breakups. We've had suburban young people end of year studies over the end of year, led by Brother Scott Madden. And some of us, well, we've been fortunate to have another birthday. So we've been able to celebrate another year, hopefully of growth, hopefully of age. Generally that happens to us whether we like it or not. Then in the last few weeks, yes, we've restarted our activities. We've returned to the busy life with Sunday school, our Sunday evenings, our Wednesday nights, youth group, and this week, suburban. We might say, well, yeah, that's life. It just simply goes on and pretty much seems the same. It's not like we've had an earth-shattering or a life-stopping moment in our lives. It's not like we've been hit by a truck this year. That may be a poor joke, but so maybe let's zoom out. For those that don't understand that joke, please come and see me afterwards and I can enlighten you. But let's zoom out a bit and let's have a look around us at maybe the national level. We obviously live here in Australia. I'm not sure how many people remember losing the internet, their phones. We had the wonderful Optus network outage on the 8th of November. And across Australia, millions of people were affected. We had impacted services. The bank hotlines were unavailable. The transport networks that relied upon Optus networks, so Melbourne train network went down. The national ATO, which obviously if we owe debts to the ATO, maybe that didn't worry us so much, but yeah, we lost our government services. New South Wales Government Services, New South Wales Health Service, New South Wales. We lost our hotlines in South Australia to the hospitals and to SA Health, and same in Melbourne. any businesses that were unable to receive EFTPOS transactions. We basically lost about half a day of being able to transact any transactions to purchase or to buy morning tea, coffees, lunches. And anyone that was working from home, they were impacted by that network outage. So pretty much, if you didn't want to buy a coffee, if you didn't want to purchase your morning teas, obviously we're going in cashless society, right? If you didn't have an emergency, you're great, you're fine. But there were a lot of people that were impacted, and it shows how fragile our system is when we become so reliant upon technology and our communications networks. And that wasn't even a cyber attack by Russia or anything like that. That was just a software upgrade. Well, so they say. Nationally, we're looking at an economic crisis with cost of living. And these are the same old headlines that we're seeing come out in our newspapers still. There's families who are unable to afford accommodation, their household bills, or even historically cheap fast food. And McDonald's have been kind enough to put out a loose change menu, and I'm not sure who calls $12 loose change. But who here can remember when we had the good old ice creams that were 30 cents? Yeah? That's just to show the age. I think that was around 1994 to 1996. That's just going by the fact that that's when I started my apprenticeship, and I remember having a Macca's across the road when they brought out the 30 cent ice cream. It was fantastic. But in all reality, for many, it's a matter of living from week to week. And if you're fortunate enough to receive a pay packet, it's gone before the next pay. And maybe we can understand what Haggai means when he says, he who earns wages to put them in a bag with holes. Literally, you put money in the pocket and it's gone. And if you're reliant upon the last line of support within Australia, we are fortunate in Australia to have Centrelink. Well, good luck on getting through, because you can be on the phone for hours. Their wait time is worse than ever, and they're unable to service the number of calls coming through. And if you do manage to get through, great, there's further delays in getting your claim processed. As they increase the staff, more people are needed to access the safety net, and this is happening as our unemployment, just this last week, started to rise, albeit against historically low levels. And so as a nation, we have individuals, we have families that are struggling to get the support financially, mentally, and physically that they may need to be able to live. This one I've put in because talking with a friend who lives up in the Northern Territory, it's become very obvious the increase in our military presence up in the northern part of Australia. Between Townsville, Darwin, below Darwin through to Alice Springs, they are extremely present, and the Americans and Australian soldiers are building up. And that is a result of the National Defence Strategic Review in 2023, about April, where they advised that we do need to increase our military presence and be aware, or be ready for any attacks from China specifically, but from the north of Australia. And yes, that has been going on since around 2011, where America has been, I suppose, coming into Australia, upskilling, transferring skills, and then going back to the US. But it's become extremely obvious in the volume of their military presence. So, looking at Australia, we'd go, yeah, we're familiar with those headlines, we've seen them, they're fairly common. So let's maybe zoom out a bit broader. And I've chosen to look at specifically China and Japan. And hopefully half the reason of zooming out and looking in, we can actually see where this actually is within the global presence, just in case we get lost from how big the world is. But our regional partners, they have slowing economies. China has come off the back of an incredible period of growth, and we saw during the global financial crisis the impact that China's growth had on Australia. Their largest property developer, however, Evergrande, was ordered to be liquidated after they were unable to restructure their $500 billion Aussie dollars of debt. And whilst it's too early to know the full impact, it brings further uncertainty to our global economies. And Australia historically has benefited from China. As our economy grows, they require the raw materials, and Australia has these in abundance, and we're quite happy to sell them to China and other countries. But on the back of this massive collapse of Evergrande, and that's been 2 to 3 years in the making, but they've finally been ordered by the Hong Kong court to liquidate. On the back of this, Japan only last week slipped into recession. And although England is outside the Asia-Pacific region, England also this last week slipped into recession. Now, again, I'm not sure if anyone can remember what prevented Australia going into recession during the GFC of 2009-2011. We were fortunate enough in Australia to escape that whole GFC because our exports were the raw materials and our grains. We were on the back of a mining boom. But China no longer can just keep growing like that. So here is the minor bit of supposition that I've got at the moment. Can anyone remember back to 1989 to 1991, 90, thereabouts, the recession that Australia had to have? Unemployment rose, interest rates peaked, families struggled, people lost their homes. And I do remember that period very well because my father had his own business. It was a period of immense pressure on families, financially, and obviously that has a mental stress that goes with it. And so, although we're unsure what these developments in China, Japan and UK mean, there's definitely a level of nervous anticipation, especially when we currently face that cost of living pressure here in Australia. In another aspect, from a regional level, late last year, China had their deadliest earthquake in years, when a 6.2 magnitude earthquake killed 127 people and injured more than 700. Then on New Year's Day, Japan experienced a powerful 7.6 earthquake, which killed 222 people. In addition to this, a bit further away, we have the volcanic eruptions in Iceland after being dormant for a long period. And I'm just going to flick across to YouTube for a couple of quick videos around the Iceland volcanoes.
These are some of the scenes in the Reykjanes Peninsula of Iceland after a volcanic eruption began expelling lava in the region.
This style of eruption differs somewhat from the kind of popular culture explosions that you might see.
Here's why this eruption looks so different and what threats it poses. Iceland is home to more than 130 volcanoes across more than 30 volcanic systems. And right now, lava is erupting out of the Svartsengi volcanic system, located in the Reykjanes Peninsula of southwest Iceland.
In a traditional volcano, the volcanic material funnels through a central vent, typically. Like in those volcanoes that you ideate in Hollywood, where there is a mountain and a conical peak and the summit and everything like flows out of the summit, whether that's an ash plume that explodes explosively into the sky or whether the lava comes up and out of the center and like leaks down the side of the mountain. Here it's not like that.
Instead, in this type of eruption, known as a fissure eruption, lava basically oozes from cracks in the ground. And the type of lava typically involved in these two kinds of eruptions also looks different. An explosive eruption is often due to viscous, sticky magma that doesn't flow easily, while a fissure eruption pushes out fluid and runny magma that spreads across the landscape.
The big danger with these is that these lava flows can spread out quite a long way. And obviously, as we're seeing in Iceland right now, that poses a threat to both the infrastructure in the region and people's lives.
The eruption from the Svartsengi volcanic system occurred near Grindavik, an Icelandic fishing town. The surrounding area is home to a major airport, one of the country's most popular tourist attractions, the Blue Lagoon, and a power plant that provides hot water for the majority of the peninsula. Eruptions in this part of Iceland have been increasing steadily in recent years, after a very long dormant period.
This is just an area of Iceland that goes through these periodic eras of on and off eruption activity and then quiescence. So like around a millennia or so, the peninsula is quiet. You don't see volcanic activity. And then it starts up. And then that era of volcanic activity lasts for centuries.
Iceland sits on top of the Eurasian and North American tectonic plates, making it a hotbed of seismic and volcanic activity. When the tectonic plates slip past one another, earthquakes occur, and as the plates spread apart, magma can leak up to the surface, generating volcanic eruptions.
Yeah. I'll cut it there. It's not designed to be a science lesson, but I do find it interesting to look at YouTube videos and all that sort of stuff. But the part that I really want to look at here is they're talking about how Iceland's been stable for the last millennia, so we're talking a long period of time, and now it's starting to get into an active period. Japan, we're familiar with the earthquakes that happen around there, and China maybe not so much. We've seen the earthquake in Turkey at the beginning of last year. So while it's not unusual in certain areas to have that activity, it's a reminder that the activity is still happening. It's a display of the earth, preparing for that great shaking when our Lord will come to redeem Israel. And so, linking back to the scriptures, we see Mark 13, but when you shall hear of wars and rumours of wars, be ye not troubled. So he's talking to us, don't be troubled. For such things must needs be, but the end shall not yet be yet. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There shall be earthquakes in divers places. There shall be famines and troubles. These are the beginnings of sorrows. So it was foretold that earthquakes, famines, wars would happen. So zooming out a bit from China and their economic woe and Japan with the earthquakes going through there in the last 3 months, we're going to go across to Europe and have a look at a different type of earthquake in some ways, more a political earthquake that's happening. So we're going to look at France, and because I've got Dutch heritage, the Netherlands are of interest to me, and hopefully it will become interesting to you looking through this as well. So across the world, we're seeing a level of nationalism and extremism, the desire to protect a nation's identity. And in the Netherlands, Wilders, who's seen as the Dutch version of Trump, won the most seats in the November Dutch elections. Typical of the Dutch, even though you win the most seats, doesn't mean that you can govern, because it was only about 30 seats out of the 88 seats. So we've still got to form an alliance with our other parties. But the key thing was, this was a shock to other European nations, because the Netherlands was once seen as the beacon of tolerance. However, the platform that Wilders promoted was one of anti-Islam, anti-asylum seekers, migrant pushbacks, and Islamisation, the removal of mosques and Islamic schools through the Netherlands. So far, he's been unable to obtain an overall majority vote, and so he's still trying to form that coalition. But along with that anti-Islam sentiment is also an anti-Semitism surge, which has been further triggered by the war between Israel and Palestine. So we've got the political shaking and worry from this extreme politician. Meanwhile, we've got protests which are erupting in France, Germany, Belgium, Poland, Romania, Italy and Spain, and the Netherlands, led by the farmers. I'm going to go through two videos here again. They're around the same thing about the farmers, but they come from different viewpoints.
The farmers have had it. They've taken to the streets across Europe, protesting cuts to tax breaks, competition from cheaper imports, onerous environmental regulations, and sprawling bureaucracy. The spark came from Germany, where the government rolled back agricultural diesel subsidies. If that sounds familiar, that's because in 2018, it was a seemingly innocuous fuel tax that unleashed the Gilets jaunes across France. France is the biggest agricultural producer in Europe, worth about 100 billion euros every year, but still imports about 50% of its fruits and vegetables. In Germany, agriculture employs less than 1 million people, but it accounts for more than half of the nation's land use. Across the board, though, in GDP terms, agriculture is minuscule. But in very real terms, what is more important than feeding your population? Plus, issues from climate change to the war in Ukraine have highlighted the importance of local food security. In Germany, a partial backtrack by the government wasn't enough. Nor in France. Even the EU has had to flinch. What makes it even harder for politicians is the overwhelming support for farmers by the broader population. Agriculture benefits from huge subsidies. About 1/3 of the whole EU budget goes to farmers, to the tune of about 55 billion euros in 2021. Plus, German farmers enjoyed record-breaking revenue last year. But when you speak to them, it's not just about money. There's also an impression that lofty climate and trade goals are being issued by lawmakers far from the soil that grows the food that sustains them, and an impression which anti-establishment politicians hope to harvest in a year rich with elections.
Ce qu'on a vu bloquer pour montrer notre mécontentement envers l'État, envers un peu toute l'Europe et tous ces gens qui mécontentement envers l'État, envers un peu toute l'Europe et tous ces gens qui nous méprisent et qui méprisent l'agriculture et qui font que les agriculteurs s'en sortent plus.
Des crevettes Honduras transportées dans un camion français avec un chauffeur étranger.
Die Landwirtschaft in Deutschland hat die letzten 5 Jahre 25 Milliarden Euro verloren. Und ich bin einer davon, der auch was verloren hat.
On fait rentrer de la viande uruguayenne ou argentine ou brésilienne qui n'est pas produite de la même manière que chez nous. C'est de la distorsion de concurrence et c'est des choses qui ne peuvent plus exister.
Wenn es so weitergeht, wird es solche kleinen Familienbetriebe, wie wir haben, nicht mehr geben. Vielleicht wird es dann auch die deutsche Landwirtschaft nicht mehr geben, ich weiß es nicht. Wenn es aber uns nicht mehr gibt, dann werden die Produkte aus dem Ausland importiert. Und dann wissen wir nicht, unter welchen Bedingungen sie produziert werden.
I'm very sensitive to the message that farmers are concerned by administrative burden. This is a general topic. You know that this is close to my heart, to reduce these administrative burdens. So we will work with the Belgian presidency on a proposal that we then will present ready in time before the next Agricultural Council to work on reducing these administrative burdens.
Sur notre modèle social, sur nos services publics, sur notre démocratie. Le plateforme pour avancer, même pas
So I think we'll stop it there. Hopefully the concept has come across that we have a large divide and disconnect between the policymakers that sit in our parliaments and the people that actually do the work out in the fields. It does remind you, does it not, of what brought about the French Revolution, where we had the kings and all the politicians sitting in their palaces, while we had the farmers that needed to raise their pitchforks. But effectively what we've got is two wars, Israel and Palestine, Ukraine and Russia, which are driving these nations mad and desiring to see better outcomes for their own people, for their own nations. They're seeing the need to secure their own food sources. And of course, we've got the Greens, or the necessity to look after the planet responsibly. But those laws are coming in the way of how we can farm and how we can make a profit at the end of the day. And so, looking at the Dutch elections, it reminds me of Matthew 24. Immediately after the tribulation of those days shall the sun be darkened, and the moon shall not give her light, and the stars shall fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven shall be shaken. Then shall appear the Son of Man in heaven, and then shall all the tribes of the earth mourn, and they shall see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. He shall send his angels with a great sound of a trumpet, and they shall gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the earth to the other. Now learn a parable with the fig tree, and remember that the fig tree speaks of Israel. When his branch is yet tender, and putteth forth leaves, ye know that summer is nigh. So likewise, ye, when ye shall see all these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all things be fulfilled. Heaven and earth shall pass away, but my words shall not pass away. And we can be certain that those words that Christ spoke back then, they will come to pass. God is true and faithful to his promises. He will execute judgment, and he will bring the return of his Son. And so now, moving from the western part of Europe, let's move across to the next war, Ukraine and Russia. The war in Ukraine and Russia appears really to have come to a stalemate, and while we swelter away here, it's probably hard to remember that Ukraine and Russia are in the middle of winter here, and wars do come to a stalemate during that time. It's still continuing, and in this next week, it will enter its third year. It drags on, and there's civilian deaths almost daily. There's exchanges of drones dropping bombs, missile strikes, ground warfare on a weekly or daily basis. In the last month, another 2 Russian ships that were based in the Black Sea have been hit by Ukraine forces. And over the past 2 years, it's estimated that 11,000 civilians have been killed and over 19,000 wounded. It's estimated that around 400,000 military Russian personnel have been killed, over 6,400 tanks, 12,000 armoured combat vehicles, 25 warships. I just roll those numbers off the tongue, right? An enormous amount of life that's been lost. And it becomes mind-numbing how many people are affected by the loss of a son, a father, a mother, a daughter, a brother, a sister. And Russia seems unable to make progress. Ukraine, with the backing of Europe, USA, Australia, and the UK, all in the name of freedom. But there is movement, and it appears that in the last week, Ukraine has finally capitulated in the city of Avdiivka. It's very hard to pronounce that. With the city in ruins and Russian elite military circling the city. And so, moving across to Ukraine.
Дитячий майданчик. Буквально все рівняється бомбами разом з місцевими мешканцями, які залишаються в підвалах. Російська армія абсолютно не щадить нікого. 9-й квартал Авдіївки. Місце найстрашніших руйнувань. Будинки знесені. Ось такий приватний сектор. Ось таке руйнування. Тут був останній магазин Авдіївки. Але
Давай! Давай, пішов!
виглядає зараз центральна вулиця. Красива, колись центральна.
There are lives behind that camera. Now, it looks like in the last 24 hours, Ukraine capitulated as Russia executed pincer movements and isolated that town. They have faced similar situations before. They were able to recover those cities previously. However, a subsequent influx of Western weapons and, sorry, I'll rephrase that. Previously, a subsequent influx of Western weapons and inspired military thinking led to a change of tide later in the year, and they were able to liberate Kherson and Kharkiv regions. But it's a different war now. 2 years later, global politics are having a more significant impact on the battlefield. We've got a stuttering Western nation or society that's probably directly contributed to the likely retreat of Ukraine in Avdiivka. The US leads the way in providing weapons to Ukraine because of the scale and speed which they can provide them. But over the end of the year, they were struggling to get through a $95 billion package which included aid for Ukraine. And up until this last week, it had not been approved. Other allies are struggling to fill that gap. And it means that Ukraine has to, we saw it on that YouTube clip, Ukraine has had to ration the ammunition and manage low levels of morale. And Avdiivka may not be the only withdrawal that Kiev has to consider now. This last week, Ukraine signed a French security pact, securing $3.23 billion in military aid, and previously they signed, or shortly before, they signed a pact with Germany, which secured $1.22 billion. I mean, those numbers are really paltry, aren't they, in comparison to what the USA provides? This last week, USA approved $60 billion for Ukraine aid, And against this backdrop, we now have Donald Trump running for president again, USA. Obviously, as we said, USA a major backer of Ukraine, and he's making wonderful statements that are waking up all the NATO nations. I'm going to, again...
Actions in Europe. Some countries are treating it as a wake-up call, almost like constructive feedback. Others are angry. They're making jibes at Trump. But all of them seem to agree on one thing, that Europe cannot rely on the US alone. They need to come together. They need to prepare for war. Here's our report.
One of the presidents of a big country stood up and said, well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
That was the speech that has shaken Europe. European NATO members, anyway. Trump said, you got to pay your bills. And it seems now Europe has finally woken up.
So I think it still is the plea for everybody to do more. And I think what the presidential candidate in America says is also something to maybe wake up some of the allies who haven't done that much. So hopefully we all do more, and collectively we are stronger together.
These words from former US President Donald Trump should act as a cold shower to all those who constantly disregard this increasingly real threat Europe is facing. We have to stand on our own feet, of course, still counting on full cooperation with the United States. But Europe must do more to ensure its security.
They're talking about waking up, doing more, a cold shower. Basically, exactly what Trump seems to have wanted. But the Europeans don't seem too happy about it. They seem hurt by Trump's statement.
No matter what will happen in the US in this year, I think the conclusion has to be written already now that Europe needs to be stronger, and we need to be able to do more on our own.
Article 5 of the Washington Treaty was used for the first time after a terrorist attack on the United States after September 11th. And at that time, Poland sent army brigades to Afghanistan for decades. And we didn't send the bills for that to Washington. Alliances also strengthened the United States.
The Polish minister does have a point. He says that the only time NATO acted together was after 9/11, after the US was attacked. They probably didn't have to. American firepower alone would have been enough. But they did anyway. They did it to prove a point. The main purpose of NATO is deterrence, the all for one and one for all mantra. From the weakest member to the strongest, everyone will work together. Even those who don't have much to offer militarily. That was the whole reason behind NATO. Trump's statements have changed that. Europe is awake now. They might begin contributing their fair share, but they may not trust the US again, especially under Trump. European countries have begun preparing to survive without American assistance. Poland, France, and Germany have vowed to make Europe stronger. Poland's Prime Minister wants more money invested in defense projects. The three countries also plan to deepen their mutual defense ties by reviving a dormant regional grouping called the Weimar Triangle. Others may follow suit, seek similar intra-European alliances. Europe could start looking inwards instead of across the Atlantic. So Trump has both gained and lost something. He gained the promise of funds, but lost trust, little that he had in the first place anyway. That trade-off may be worth it to him, but as for the rest of the NATO members, the alarm bells are ringing loud and clear.
So there were some key phrases in that, and hopefully, if we're familiar with the scriptures, we will have picked them up. Just got to find my mouse. Waking up, increasing defence spending, we need to be stronger, we need to do more on our own, the weakest member to the strongest member altogether. And we're taken, aren't we? Joel 3. Proclaim ye this among the Gentiles. Prepare war. Wake up the mighty men. Let all the men of war draw near. Let them come up. Beat your ploughshares into swords and pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye heathen, and come and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. And we know the context, don't we? We're talking about that day of Armageddon, that day of judgment of all nations. That's what we're seeing, isn't it? And so, let's move from Ukraine and Russia down to Israel, Palestine, Yemen. So, Middle East. And in all reality, the war just keeps going on, doesn't it? There's war between Israel, Gaza, Israel, Lebanon, and I'm sure that we'd be aware that October 7 last year, Hamas conducted an attack on from Gaza on Israeli civilians. About 1,200 people were killed that day, mainly civilians and not soldiers. They included not only Israeli but foreign nationals. And approximately another 250 hostages were taken. The physical and the emotional scars of this attack have been felt by all levels of society, with gruesome details of what Hamas-led militants did to their victims. And I suppose we felt initially the world asked Israel for restraint and then started to show a bit of support and backing for Israel. Having Hamas show absolutely no regard for life or nationality united the world for a short while. Israel initially rejected the proposals for the ceasefire, and Qatar negotiated a ceasefire, which began on November 24th, initially for 4 days, but lasting up to 7 days while hostages were released. And then, with the release of 110 hostages, Hamas refused to release any more hostages, and the war resumed.
Welcome to CBS News Mornings. I'm Anne-Marie Green, and we begin this morning with breaking news out of the Middle East. Israel's military has resumed combat operations in Gaza after a week-long truce expired overnight. These are live pictures of Gaza, where Israeli fighter jets have been targeting positions across the enclave. Israel's military claims Hamas violated the truce first by firing rockets towards Israeli territory. In the hours since the truce expired, Gaza's Hamas-run health ministry says 32 people have been killed in airstrikes. CBS News has not verified those claims. Reuters is reporting no aid or fuel trucks have crossed into Gaza since the ceasefire ended. And the breakdown in the ceasefire comes after Hamas released 8 Israeli hostages yesterday in exchange for 30 Palestinian prisoners. So joining me now with the latest is CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay. All right, Chris, so what do we know about what's going on the ground? What's the latest there?
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Well, you know, this morning, normally when we've woken up to the list of the exchange of hostages, Israeli hostages for Palestinian prisoners that would take place, that has been taking place every day for the past week now. Instead, we awoke to the exchange of rockets and airstrikes, rockets coming out of Gaza towards Israel and airstrikes over Gaza. It seems now that Israel is targeting southern Gaza. According to Gazans on the ground there, Israeli Defense Forces have been warning civilians to evacuate the city of Khan Yunis. Khan Yunis has long been suspected by Israel to really be the nucleus, the main command center of Hamas, and Israeli Defense Forces have been airdropping leaflets over parts of southern Gaza, telling people to get out of the way for what appears to be the next major step of this offensive from Israel. In fact, according to the Israeli government, Hamas should now brace itself for the, quote, beating of the mother of all beatings, rather.
All right, so let's talk about the breakdown in this ceasefire. Israel says it's the fault of Hamas. What do we know about why things fell apart?
So according to, according to Israel, it was Hamas who decided to bring an end to this ceasefire by failing to produce the women hostages that Israel was asking for. For Hamas's part, it says that that list of women was unacceptable because it believed them to contain women, female soldiers, not just civilians on that list. So that's how talks appear to have broken down. But there's been a concern building for a while that Hamas sooner or later was simply going to run out of hostages that it could provide to live up.
So we'll move it on a bit. So we saw the ceasefire brokered end of November and then back to war. Israel continues to look for the hostages that were left from, or that remain from that initial attack, and they continue to attack the Hamas bases. Hamas is using hospitals to protect themselves, to set up their headquarters, and they've used the UN headquarters as refuge. And on the 30th of January, Israel stormed the Ibn Sina hospital located in the West Bank, and they killed 3 Palestinian militants who belonged to Hamas. Both Israel and Hamas agreed that those victims were Hamas militants, and therefore Hamas were breaking the protection afforded to hospitals. So we've now ended up really with a humanitarian crisis where about 1.4 million displaced Palestinians have moved from northern Gaza down the south, and no country wants them. Egypt is now building walls to prevent them from entering into Egypt. And the French president appears to be attempting to navigate that cautious, very narrow path while telling Israel that, while recognising Israel's right to protect itself, we do urge them to stop this bombing in Gaza. On February the 7th, he paid tribute to the victims of October 7th. And a violinist played Maurice Ravel's instrumental version of the Kaddish, the Jewish prayer for the dead, as the president performed his duties as master of ceremonies. In the middle of it, the 42 smiling, sunny photos of the dearly departed. Children, husbands, wives, uncles, aunts, loved ones. Immense emotion overwhelmed the families of French citizens killed by Hamas on October 7th in Israel, when their portraits, carried by the gendarmes, emerged into this very special ceremony on Wednesday, February 7th. 4 months to the day after the biggest anti-Semitic massacre of our century, Emmanuel Macron paid tribute to the victims of October 7th. The unspeakable resurfaced from the depths of history, said the President, evoking the savagery and barbarism of this massive and odious attack. So you can see that the French President is emotionally charged with this. The people of France, there is that link, but they still need to be aware that there's battle lines and there's lines to be drawn. On the other side, the Dutch Appeals Court have ruled that the country must halt exports of F-35 fighter parts to Israel. And so the European nations aren't really certain where to stand through this whole process and this war. Further to this, as an output from that war, we now have shipping woes. And having gone through COVID and trying to get spare parts for critical equipment, I know how much or how hard it is when you have all the shipping channels which are restricted, narrowed or prevented. But we've got the Houthis who are attacking ships in the Red Sea. And in response to the Israel-Gaza conflict, we have the Hamas supporters attacking ships travelling through the Red Sea. They're attacking under the excuse of attacking Israeli-owned lines, but in reality they're attacking any ships that may have a tenuous link, if at all, to Israel, the UK or the USA. And the Houthis are Iranian-backed rebels. They're able to impact movements of goods across the globe. with shipping just starting to become more reliable after a few years of disruption, with Ever Given in 21 that blocked the in Egypt, the canal over in Egypt. Suez, thank you. With COVID in 2019 to 22, it again puts pressure across the world, and the world's largest shipping firms are continuing to pour shipments through the Red Sea after these attacks. As container ships are diverted around the Cape of Good Hope on the southern tip of Africa, it adds thousands of miles to the journey, and disruption is driving up the cost of shipments to Asia and Europe, again helping with the cost of living and renewed inflation shock. So although global freight costs have risen sharply, they're still not quite where they were during COVID, but they're definitely rising. And it's not just shipping lines, it's affecting our cruise lines. So good old Virgin Voyages and Carnival International. I don't go on cruises myself, but I know a few people that do and thoroughly enjoy them. Well, Virgin and Carnival have decided that it's too dangerous to take their ships through those shipping channels. Then we had the drone that killed 3 US soldiers on the 29th of January in Jordan. In response to that, the US then launched a broad attack against Iran's military wing and affiliated militias. They hit more than 85 targets using their B-1 bombers. And the US has to, again, navigate between that show of power that is not worthwhile attacking, but trying not to escalate the war in Palestine and Israel. And so what are we waiting for? Well, in all reality, we've seen wars go on for the last, how many years? I mean, we got excited, 1948, 1967. We've seen the years come and go. And it reminds us how, towards the end of last year, Brother Phil showed us the timelines in Daniel, the 1335-day prophecy. We've seen the time periods where you can watch those time periods that were prophesied in the scriptures. But we shouldn't lose hope. Because Daniel himself, he was looking for time periods, wasn't he? He saw from Jeremiah that the time of Jerusalem's desolation would be 70 years. His response, we read of that in Daniel 9, and do yourself a favour. Read Daniel's prayer and see how he quotes God's character to himself and relies on that for God to then take action. Are our prayers as earnest as Daniel? We find in Daniel chapter 10 that the archangels, Gabriel and Michael, were working together to direct the world events. And we can be assured that the angels are directing the affairs even now, even though we may be feeling that it just keeps going on and on and on. And so, to close, I'd like to close with a couple of quotes that we should know well, but we should be able to take comfort from. 2 Peter, this second epistle, beloved, I now write unto you, in both which I stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance, that ye be mindful of the words which were spoken before by the holy prophets, and of the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Saviour. Knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts, and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of the creation. I mean, they will seem to continue. It's been, 80 years, nearly? 75 years since Israel was set up as a nation, and we still see those wars happening. Don't lose hope, because that's what's going to happen in the last day. But God will judge. And as we read at the beginning, of the times and the seasons, brethren, ye have no need that I write unto you. For you know perfectly that the day of the Lord so comes as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. And so let's be ready. Let's not get disheartened by the continual things that just keep going on, that seem like our lives just are going day by day, because one day our lives will be interrupted. And God has warned us that when we're not ready, when it seems like it keeps going, Christ will return.
Thanks for that, Michael. It was certainly very interesting to see the last events from the last couple of months only. What a lot's happened. So we'll close this evening just by a word of prayer, and then if you all want to stick around, there's going to be a lovely dinner that's been provided, put on. So if you all arise, we'll just close with prayer. Our Father, as we come to the close tonight, we lift our hearts in gratitude to you. We thank you for the time we've spent together, delving into your word and your works. They have enriched our minds, and we are grateful for the wisdom and understanding you have granted us. As we depart from this lecture, we ask for your protection and guidance. Keep us safe on our journeys home, and grant us the opportunity to share the knowledge and insights we've gained with others. Let your word be a light that shines brightly in our lives and in the world. We thank you for all things, Father, including this dinner that you have provided for us tonight, and we offer this prayer in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Saviour. Amen.